My name is Charlie DeCook. I'm with Total Joint Specialist and wanted to share with you the 10 principles of efficiency. The first is if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. Time transparency is the number one principle of efficiency that we found to be important. What does that mean? That means in every one of our ORs, in pre-op and PACU, time is visible. Every single step of that patient journey is visible to visitors, to our staff, to our surgeons. Time becomes valued by our staff when we recognize where time is lost and how we improve as an organization. It also becomes very personal to us as we get our monthly numbers back of how we're performing. We can be competitive against ourselves and against others as we start to realize the implications of time in our operating rooms. And what one team does is it allows us to measure time and therefore improve it in order to make time visible in your OR. Without you saying a word, time is now visible. It is not only does your rep and your circulating nurse have this, everyone has this information and show you exactly on their phone exactly what step you are in the procedure. Of course, this is also plastered on the wall on monitors so that we know the next step in the procedure, we know which instrument you need next, and we know how long it takes for each individual step in that procedure. Every month and every week, we get monthly and weekly reports of our performance. We compare one center versus another center. We can compare our centers versus your centers. We can look at this and get good baseline metrics of what we should really expect from our teams in terms of time and efficiency. So literally every one of our cases, we have one team running in the background. So this happens to be a total hip that I did. We started at 7:33. And on the bottom of the screen, you see one team. And one team is keeping track of what step in the procedure I am. Here we're 7 minutes in. We're broaching the femur at 8.5 minutes. We've got some trial components in. And near the end, at 10 minutes, we're getting ready to put the ceramic head ball on. So ask your Zimmer Biomet rep about one team. They can bring this into your OR, and you can trial it out and see how it works. The second efficiency point, which I think is critical, is to realize that the operating room is sacred. Obviously, as surgeons, we know that the quality of our work is absolutely the most important thing we do. But if you adopt a manufacturing mindset, you realize it's not only the quality of work, but it's really the potential to make revenue. So as we think about the potential of the OR, we talk about a lot about OR time versus turnover time. And I think there's too many people around the country that emphasize turnover time. Turnover time is not nearly important as OR time. So our expectation is from when that patient gets in to when we start the procedure is 7 minutes. That's our expectations. If you want a factory to be really efficient, you have to think of it like a machine with 1,000 little gears. Well, what does Elon mean there? It means we have to emphasize the little things, and that's efficiency principle number 3, the little things. We often think about anesthesia or turnover. These are big blue whales that are too large for us to tackle. We have to tackle the little things. You need to find the ladybug problems in your operating room because it's the small and the simple things that happen where great things come to pass. 1,000 little things happen during your surgery. And it's not about the big things. It's about fixing the little things that are important. And I just took some pictures of our OR so you appreciate the little things. These are IV bags prepped and ready to go. We get all the cords that normally are dangled around and take a minute or two to deal with in the operating room. We get that all set in pre-op ready to go. Anesthesia has to be ready. Here's all the spinals ready to go. You have to learn how to accept and give up an instrument all very quickly. Things as little as where you put the lights at the end of cleaning that room are huge. They pay off dividends. How you get ready with SteriCubes the next day is critical. So it doesn't matter where you start. Let's say you do 8 cases and you're finished at 5 o'clock every time you do these cases. If you fix one little thing, those things add up over time. It's called aggregation of marginal gains. And this is an example of what happens when you have that aggregation of marginal gains. What happens is turnover time goes like that. When you start looking at time, that's what happens. So we will build the entire supply chain ourselves. That means that at Total Joint Specialists, we care about the entire supply chain. We have to control that entire supply chain if we're going to take pride and control time, efficiency, value, and money. So our fourth principle is identifying your constraints. Now, what are your constraints? Really, the constraints are what sets your production rate. It is the rate limiting step, and you have to identify where that is for you. So the most important thing is you identify your biggest constraint first. You think about the weakest link in the chain, we call that the constraint. So if we're making a bunch of washing machines, this particular machine right here is our biggest constraint. It's the weakest link. When you identify that constraint, what do? You exploit it. You turn up that lever and you make that machine go as fast as it possibly can. Now, the constraint in your operating room is not anesthesia. Your constraint is not turnover time. The constraint is you, the surgeon. Can you believe that? This whole time I thought otherwise, and a few years ago we realized that it's really the surgeon is the largest constraint. Once you identify that the surgeon is your largest constraint, it's the greatest limiter of throughput. You have to exploit it. That means you exploit your surgeons to do more and more surgeries. That's the key with our ASCs. We exploit our surgeons. We want them producing more. To do that, I have to increase their output. How do I do that? I put the staff, the supplies, and the money they need in order to have higher output. It's that simple. What's happened in the past is we've limited the staff and the money we throw at people. When that does that, it limits their output. The biggest mistake people make is optimizing something that shouldn't exist. I love this principle of Elon Musk, and this is our fifth principle, which is delete, delete, delete. Your enemy is complexity. You have to simplify it by deletion first. Simplify by deletion first. That means if you have 12 surgeon protocols, that means you have 12 surgeons going to your ASC. That is over. It's done. You have to delete it, and you have to have one universal protocol. That means every single surgeon at your ASC has to prep the leg the same way. They have to give the same prescription protocol. Same goes with surgeon trays. If you have 12 surgeon trays, guess what? You know what you have to do? You have to delete it down to one universal tray. Same with implant vendors. There is no way we can be efficient if I had 4 implant vendors in our ASC. No way to be efficient that way. You have to delete them all and get them down to one. One universal vendor means all the difference for efficiency. So set extremely high standards and let people self-select. I love this quote from Elon, and it's our principle number 6, which is setting high expectations. And the first way we set high expectations is with our anesthesia team. We love our anesthesia team, but it is very clear where the signal is. The signal goes from the surgeon to the anesthesiologist, and we set high expectations for how long it takes them to do a spinal or how long it takes them to do a block. So when we send a clear signal out to pre-op to start that spinal and that pre-op block, our expectation is you finish that in 10 minutes. And you're darn right, we measure failure when that happens because we have to maintain high expectations in order to get high output and high quality, right? There's other organizations that have these same types of high expectations. Delta's a perfect example of this. Delta sets high expectations and they get high results and outputs as a result of that. Their expectations are very simple. We want people to arrive safely and we want to arrive on time. Those are the 2 major expectations Delta has. We at Total Joint Specialists have those exact same expectations. We want safety first and we want people to be on time. That's it. We also set expectations for ourselves as the surgeons. Our scrub techs do the exact same thing. They look and see, hey, where did I put that light? How did I open that tray? Where is the Sтерicube in the room? Our nurses do the same thing. This is the reason why our nurses show up earlier than we ever asked them to, because they self-select and they set their own high expectations. Probably the greatest thing for Elon Musk is really pointing us towards first principles. The best way to think is to boil things down to their fundamental truths and reason up from there. So that's efficiency principle number 7, breaking down roles. What do I mean by that? Well, traditionally an OR team is considered really your circulating nurse and your scrub tech, and they are considered your OR team. But we've decided to break out those roles and completely separate them. That means that I have an individual room team that is made of assistants and scrub techs that their only job is to help get ready for that room. So it may be bringing Stericubes in the room or sticking a Stericube out. It may be opening up an extra tray. That room is in charge of the room, period, end of story, that's it. They function totally independent of our second team, which is our patient team. Our patient team is made of our anesthetists and our nurses. That patient team is not in charge of the room. They're in charge of the patient. That means they can go from one patient to the next without delay. No waiting on a scrub tech to say, oh, don't go get the patient yet. My room's not ready. That goes away when you separate those two out and you make the room team and the patient team independent of each other. So we would highly suggest you do that. The 8th efficiency principle is breaking down the locations. What does that mean? That means anesthesia should be in pre-op. Their primary functions in pre-op. Those tasks, i.e. spinals and blocks, should be done in pre-op. These are individual papers you can share with your anesthesia. There's many more of these, either the 4 best ones. But fundamentally, the pre-op spinals and blocks absolutely are safe and mandatory in the preoperative area. That means the operating room is saved for operating and not for anesthesia. Very, very critical. Start there. Efficiency principle number 9 is output over input. What does that mean? Well, the definition of efficiency is output over input. And for us surgeons, that means what is our output? It's the number of surgeries we do. What's the input? It's the time, effort, money that's required, the input required for that output. So when we say 12 by 12, it's an often used phrase at our centers. It's an efficiency metric we use. And that efficiency metric basically means it's what's the number of surgeries, quality, high quality surgeries you do in a certain period of time. What hospitals have gotten wrong is something called cost accounting. Cost accounting means that you're putting more importance on the input than the output. Opposite of that is something called throughput accounting. Throughput accounting means that I want to emphasize the output. That means that's the most fundamental thing that is important to me. Focusing on that means I want to know the number of surgeries I can do in an OR per day. For us, our goal is to do 10 joints in each room per day. That means I'm going to throw as much staff and money as needed in order to make that happen. If you have no limits on your input, you effectively have no limits on your output. So critical. So throughput efficiency is the key here, not limiting yourself. The last and 10th principle is match specialization. Well, what in the world does this mean, match specialization? Well, many of you know that we started as barber surgeons. That means, yes, not only do we do every surgery known to man with a scalpel, we also cut hair on the side as well. That's what happened in the 1200s when we started this business. As we began to specialize, we started to get more and more things. We started stop doing cutting hair. We started just doing the scalpel. And then we started setting bones, and then we developed our AOA, and eventually in the 50s, we finally started to become joint surgeons, right? That specialization of surgery is critical to increasing outcomes over time, to increasing your efficiency, and really your value, right? So specialization is critical for surgeons. Specialization is also critical for the hospitals and ASCs in which you operate. So in the 1500s, we had teaching hospitals, which eventually became specialty hospitals. In the 1950s, with HSS and others, we began to develop these orthopedic hospitals. We eventually got orthopedic ASCs, and finally, we're to the point where we now have ASCs directly limited to specialization of joint replacements. And the same thing happens in hospitals as it does with surgery. Outcomes improve, efficiencies improve, overall value improves. But the key here is they have to match up. The specialization of the surgeon must match the specialization of the facility in which they operate. I'll say that again. The specialization of the surgeon must match the factory or the facility in which they operate. So we believe the future is absolutely joint replacement factories. Start your journey on efficiency with one team that will make all the difference in bringing time to your ORs. And thank you very much.